To it. We've been in the book of Judges for a few weeks now, and as we look into the book of Judges, what we're discovering is that God raised up ordinary people. But what He did with them was to make them extraordinary by His own presence and His power and the Spirit. Today, we're going to be looking at the story of Gideon. And you'll find this in your Bibles in Judges chapter 6 and chapter 7. And if you would, go ahead and be turning there. We have been seeing the first three judges, Othniel, Ehud, and Shamgar. And some of you still remember some things about those three that you maybe not have ever known before. Last week, we weren't gathered together. But if you had the opportunity to watch it either on Facebook or on YouTube, I preached on Deborah, a placed woman, and how God used her, as well as her military leader Barak, in the deliverance of Israel at that time. Today I want us to look at Gideon, and if there was ever an unlikely judge, it was Gideon. I don't think Gideon would have ever seen himself as a hero, and what we need to do is allow God to show us what He sees in order for us to be able to do what He is able to do through us. We need to allow God to show us what He can do through us. It will change the way not only that we look at ourselves, it'll change the way we look at others. But when we talk about Gideon, and if you're in the 6th chapter, let me just go ahead and share that there are going to be some verses that I'm going to kind of go forwards and backwards. This is not as chronological as I would like it to be in the first part of this message. I want us to see what kind of man Gideon was. And to do that, we want to start out with chapter 6, verse 15. And in verse 15, what we find out is that, first of all, he was not a man of a great family. Verse 15 says, so he said to him, and he's talking to the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord has come. He's presented himself to Gideon. He has something to say to Gideon, and Gideon's first objection is to say, "Oh, my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan, my family, is the weakest in Manasseh." And that's not a very strong tribe to begin with. And what's more, I'm the least in my father's house. You got the wrong person. If you're looking for somebody who has got some notoriety, if you're looking for somebody who's got something to offer, you've picked the runt. You've picked the small part of the litter. I am the worst, I am the least of my family's house, and my house is the least of the tribes. He was not from a great family, and he was not of a great position of life either. He goes on go back just a couple verses, verse 11, that when he first appears to him, we find that the angel of the Lord came and he sat under the terebinth tree, which are at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash. Now that's Gideon's father. We'll see him in just a minute. An Abizrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. Gideon is not only from a small family, he's not even of a great position in life. He's living with his father, doing what his father tells him, and doing mostly manual and menial labor. And he's threshing out wheat. Now he's also doing it at this point in a winepress to hide it from the enemy. And that brings us to the next point. Not only from a great position in life, but he was not a man of great courage. Notice that what it says at the end of this verse. He was doing it in a winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. Gideon was not a man from a great family, not a man of great position, not a man of great courage. In fact, we're going to see a little bit later in this story that when he realizes who he's talking to, he's afraid he's going to die. He realizes he's talking to God himself. And the Lord had to say to him, "Peace be with you." We'll come back to this verse too in a minute. "Peace be with you. Do not fear." Gideon, you just seem to be very apprehensive about our encounter. You're afraid. You shall not die. And he had to reassure him, you shall not die. And then he gives him a task to do. And we'll look at that task in a moment. But you'll see in verse 27 that what he does is that when he goes to do the task, he took 10 men among his servants, did as the Lord had said to him, but because he feared his father's household. and the men of the city too, much to do it by day, he did it by night. Gideon was not a man of great courage. He was not a man of a great family or of a great position. He was a very unlikely hero. In fact, if we go back to verse 13, we also find out he was actually very discouraged at this point. Because what he has discovered is that God is talking to him at a time when he should have been seeing God at work. But Gideon said to him, "Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? We're under the subjection of the Midianites. How come all of this has happened to us? Where are all his miracles, which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?" You remember when we started this book, we were talking about this was a time in which they had rose a generation that didn't even know the Lord. Why? They haven't been seeing his works. Only a few, and Gideon's among them, has even heard of the mighty works of God. And now they're questioning, where are you, God? Maybe there are times in our lives where we come to that point. We're looking at situations around us and we're saying, where is God in all this? And the discouragement begins to come because as Gideon, and it says here in the very next verse, I'm going to need a little help. There we go. And now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. He was discouraged. In the midst of his discouragement, he's questioning, where has God been? And now look at what's going on around us. Things are just getting worse and worse. And if that's not enough, he said to him in Judges 6:17, he said to him, "Now, if I have found favor in your sight, show me a sign that it's you who talk with me." We usually think in Gideon of the story of the fleece. You remember? But even before the story of the fleece, he's talking to the angel of the Lord. And now he's asking the angel of the Lord to give him a sign that he's even him who he's talking to. His faith is anything but evident. You have your Bibles open. Let's just look at these verses. Chapter 6, beginning of verse 17, he says, "If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me." Verse 18, "Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you." And he, the angel of the Lord, said, "I'll wait." You need some reassuring. "I'll wait until you come back." Verse 19, "So Gideon went in, prepared a young goat, unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree, and he presented them. The angel of God said to him, 'Take the meat and the unleavened bread, and lay them on this rock, and pour out the broth,' he said. And then the angel of the Lord put out the end of his staff that was in his hand, and he touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire rose out of the rock, consumed the meat and the unleavened bread, and the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight." This is not a story that you always hear about Gideon. That before he's even told what to do about the battles and the armies that he's going to be facing, he had to get reassurance that he was even talking to the angel of God. And so he puts out this test. And he says, "Show me a sign that you're who I'm talking to." A little bit later on, beginning at verse 36, look over at verse 36, you'll find that familiar story of the sign of the fleece. This is what we're more familiar with. "So Gideon said to God, 'If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor, and if there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand.' And as you have said, and it was so. When he rose early the next morning, squeezed the fleece together, he wrung the dew out of the fleece, and a bowl full of water was there. Then Gideon said to God, 'Now, please don't be angry with me. Let me speak just once more. Let me,'" and there it is. Let me test. Let me test, I pray, just once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, but on all the ground there be dew. This is the story that we're probably more familiar with. But did you see what he calls it? He's testing God. Where is his faith? Not only is he not a man of a great family or of great position, not only is he a man of great courage and he's discouraged, he's not even a man of great faith. If there was ever an unlikely hero, it was Gideon. But now I want to surprise you. Go back to verse 12 of the 6th chapter. What kind of man did God see when he first talked to Gideon? Notice what it says there. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you." And what does he call him? "You mighty man of valor." In spite of all these things that we have said about him, in spite of all these things that is evident about his life, his hiding from the Midianites, his threshing in the winepress, his testing not only of who the angel is, but even of the message that he has to bring. God looks at him and sees a mighty man of valor. And we kind of look at that and we scratch our heads and he says, how can he see that in Gideon? Well, that question is not how can he see that in Gideon. The question is how can he see that in me? What does God see when he looks at you? And you may look at your life and see some of the same frailties and some of the same shortcomings and some of the same things that says, I don't know if I can ever be used by God. How many of you remember the message a few months ago when we talked about the burning bush with Moses? And the question was, can you be used by God? Well, of course you can. The question is, do you want to be used by God? And to do that, you have to allow yourself to be seen the way God sees you. What does God see that not even we ourselves are able to see? God sees what he can make of us in spite of ourselves. God sees what he can do with us when we are prepared to allow him. It has really nothing to do with what we are or what we bring to the table. It has to do with everything he is. God in Gideon was a valiant warrior. And that's what he wanted him to know. Gideon, you can be a valiant warrior because I can be a valiant warrior through you. And so Gideon began to obey God. Here's another part of this story that you may not have ever heard before. Well, it starts in verse 25. Like I said, we've kind of jumped around this 6th chapter, but it's helped me to pull the pieces of the puzzle out from different parts so we can put the puzzle together as one. Now we move to verse 25, and what I want you to see is that the first thing that Gideon was asked to do, well, let me go ahead and mention this. This is what made the difference in him. The Spirit of God came upon him. We'll see that in verse 34, and we'll come back to that again in a minute. But the first thing he was asked to do in chapter 6, verse 25, was to destroy his father's idols. Did you know that part of the story? Did you know that Joash, the father of Gideon, had an idol to Baal, had idols to Ashereth? And the first thing that God was asking him to do was go and destroy his father's idols? We've already read the verse that he went and did it by night because he was afraid of his household, he was afraid of his father, and he was afraid of the men of the people. What he's about to do, he will do at night. But what God tells him to do is this. He says, I want you to take your father's young bull, not even yours. I want you to take your father's young bull, the second bull of the 7 years, tear down the altar of Baal that your father has built, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it. And he goes on to tell him to build his own altar and to offer his father's bull on his own altar. And this is what happens. Look at verse 25. It came to pass that night, this is what he told him to do. Verse 26, build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement. Take the second bull and offer the burnt sacrifice with the wood and the image which you shall cut down. So, verse 27 we've already read, Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. And then a surprising thing took place. The next morning, when they discovered what had happened, the townspeople inquired around, and they found out it was Gideon who had done all this. And they are prepared now to call for Gideon's death. They want to bring him out. They want to have him put to death. And you know who comes to his defense? Joash, his own father. Sometimes it takes the obedience of the children to help bring the parents to a better understanding of God. Let that sink in for just a moment. Gideon was called to destroy his father's idol. He did. He did it in obedience, and it was his father who comes to his defense. In fact, what he basically tells the townspeople, he says, if Baal's upset about this, let Baal plead his own cause. Don't touch my son. You see, when we become obedient to God, it has a way of impacting the family as well. And sometimes it takes the children becoming obedient for the parents to come along behind. It was Gideon's obedience, the small thing of tearing down this altar. It was his obedience in the small thing that prepared him for the greater battle. The battle that he was being called to do as the judge, to lead Israel in a battle against the Midianites. Now, we're just about at the point where we're ready to see the story that you're probably more familiar with. But look at verses 33 and 34. And so it was, as soon as Gideon was... Wait a minute, I jumped a chapter. There we go. Then all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped the valley of Jezreel. And here's verse 34 again. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew the trumpet, and the Bezrites gathered behind him. Now God is able to use Gideon in a mighty way. All of what we've seen so far is what God does sometimes in our lives just to bring us to a place where he can use us for something significant. And so now he's prepared to do it. And how does he do it? How does God use Gideon as a judge? Well, the next three things that we're about to look at are the things that he does not only with Gideon, but what he does with us. And so if you take notes, this would be a good place on the back of your bulletin tonight. Note down these three things. That how God used Gideon as a judge is the same way he can use you and he uses me. And the very first thing was that he took away Gideon's strength to demonstrate his own glory. You say, what are you talking about? Well, this is the part of the story that you're probably familiar with. We're now in the 7th chapter. In verse 2 it says, And the Lord said to Gideon, The people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, My own hand has saved me. Now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people. And he says, Whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And you know what the result was? After this announcement at church, 22,000 people went home. 22,000 of the people returned. 10,000 remained. Gideon had started with 32,000 volunteers to go into battle against the Midianites. And God says, no, there's too many of them. I want you to offer to let those who want to go home, go home. We don't fault these 22,000 for turning around. I'm not going to make an issue about that because God was anticipating that. God was expecting that. And 22,000 turned around, went home, left 10,000. God looked at 10,000 and he says, there's still too many, verse 4. Bring them down to the water and I will test them for you there. This is the part of the story that you probably heard as a child. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you. And the one whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. And he looked at how they took the water from the stream. Had an opportunity, as I've shared with you before, to go to Israel. I've been to this place. They said, this is where Gideon took the people for them to watch how they did with the water. Verse 5, he brought the people down to the water. The Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you'll set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. The number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. All the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink. Those who just didn't pay any attention to what was going on in front of them, but got down and lapped up the water directly, he sent them home. 300 men, still vigilant, took the water with their hand, brought it up to their mouth. He says, these 300 I can use. And so we have this part of the story, and the Lord said, by these 300 men who lapped, I will save you, and I will deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, and every man to his place. Folks, it's not our strength that God seeks. It's not our talents, our personalities, our gifts. It's our willing spirit. It's our desire to be used by Him. That even though through our weakness, He can show Himself mighty. He can show Himself strong. The first thing He did was to take away Gideon's strength. He reduced his army from 32,000 to 300. That's less than 1% of what he started with. Because God says, I can do more with your 300 than you could do with your 32,000. It's not by your strength, not by your might, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. You know, Paul recognized that God's grace is more than sufficient for the task. And he actually talked about glorying in his own weakness. So the first thing he does is he kind of takes away our own strength. The second thing he does is to give Gideon a confidence or faith for the battle. I think this is significant too. Look at verse 9 and following. It happened on that same night that the Lord said to him, arise, go down to the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. Now, he recognizes, verse 10, that Gideon still deals with some fear issues. So he says, but if you're afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you shall hear what they have to say. And afterward your hands will be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Verse 12. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seashore in the multitude. And when Gideon came down, verse 13, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. And then his companion answered and said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon and the son of Joash, a man of Israel, and into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. And so it was when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation. Look what it says. He worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and he said, arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hands. God strengthens our faith by showing His faithfulness. Every time God shows up, every time God shows Himself faithful, it strengthens our faith to know that whatever task He has called us to, He is capable of performing. Gideon hears from the enemy camp. They already sense their defeat. And they already sense Gideon's victory. And God uses this to build his confidence, to build his faith for the battle. The third thing he does is that he gave victory through grace rather than weapons. This to me, and kids, I hope you're watching this, because this is the most exciting part of this story. Because what he does next, and you've heard this shared before, I'm pretty sure, starts in verse 16. He divided the 300 men that he had into 3 companies. He put a trumpet into every man's hand and empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. In other words, he had torches with flame already in, but they were covered with a little clay pot. He said to them, look at me, verse 17, and do likewise, and watch when I come to the edge of the camp, and you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, and I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, which, is, by the way, is where the Gideons get their slogan for the Bibles that they give out, as well as the fact that their emblem is that clay pot. You ever seen a Gideon Bible? That's what the clay pot is there for. That's what covered the torch. Well, let's go a little further. He says this to them, and then he says, when I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp. You say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him, verse 19, came out of the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, in the middle of the night. Just as they had posted the watch, they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Now, I want you to help me out here. Now, I don't want to embarrass everybody. I'm going to ask the kids to do something with me. Are y'all willing? Will you do something with me? Yeah. You look game. Stand up. Stand up. I want all the children to stand up. You've heard this story. You've seen this story. I want you to act this story out with me for just a second. It says, verse 20, then the three companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands. Hold up your left hand. Your other left hand. Thank you. They held their torches in their left hands and their trumpets in their right hand. Put a trumpet in your right hand. You ready? What's in your left hand? What's in your right hand? Where's your sword? Wow. There's no sword. You have a torch in one hand, a trumpet in another. And what do you not have in your hands? Thank you. You can be seated now. You guys are lucky. I almost made all of you do that. I'm glad we had children with us today. It helped out. But did you get the point? They went into battle with two items, a torch and a trumpet, but no sword. And yet their shout was, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. I got a surprise for you. You see, we talk about this story, but sometimes we miss the application. We are the torches. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, for it is God who commanded light to shine out of the darkness. I've already shared with you this morning that I'm going to be sharing about creation tonight. I strongly encourage you to come tonight because you're going to learn something about that first day of creation that you may not have ever thought of before. I hope you'll come. But God who commanded light to shine out of darkness has shone in our hearts to give the light in the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. What you will discover tonight and what I hope you will understand this morning is this: that the light that God first spoke into existence, He has shined within your heart. The glory of God. And that's why Jesus said you're the light of the world. Not because you came into this world with a light. No, you didn't come into the world with a light. You got your light from Jesus. You are the light of the world only because as He stood up during this festival and said, I am the light of the world. Every one of us who has named the name of Jesus Christ, who has Christ dwelling in our hearts, has that light. In Him was life. And that life was the what? The light of man. You have that light. But you know what verse 7 of 2 Corinthians chapter 4 says? Verse 7 reminds us that we have this treasure in an earthen vessel. You know what that's another word for, don't you? A clay pot. We have this treasure, this light, in a clay pot. That power may be of God and not of us, and is the duty of God in our life to see that that pot gets broken so that the light can shine. What took place in Gideon's army that night takes place in the life of each one of us when God is able to break through this clay pot to allow His light to shine. Sometimes he has to break an earthen vessel. And that's why he doesn't depend on our strength for the battle. You see, we fight from the victory, not for it. Well, that's the torch. What was the trumpet? Well, the trumpet, very simply put, is our testimony. There it is. Our testimony. It is the shout of the redeemed. We sang it this morning. Free, free. The shout of the redeemed. Psalm 107:2 says, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Are you embarrassed by knowing Jesus Christ? No. Then let me hear it. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Are you a child of God? Yes. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. I am free. I am free. You see, this is what they saw when the Midianites were down there in their camp. They saw the army of God coming their way, and what they saw was the light, and they heard the sound. And the sound was a proclamation. Here comes the army of God. The world is out there waiting for us, and we need to let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from the hand of the enemy. Because what made a difference in Gideon is what makes a difference in you and me. You go back to the 6th chapter, verse 24, you're going to find that Gideon, well, let's go ahead and, there's the picture. This is what I wanted the kids to see this. This is what you saw. A torch in one hand, a trumpet in the other, no sword, because why? The difference had already been made. You remember back in chapter 6 when he first met the angel? One of the first things he did in verse 24, not the one that he built after he destroyed his fathers, but when he first met the angel, he built an altar there to the Lord, and he called it Jehovah Shalom. The Lord is peace. And what Israel needed this time, in the midst of an army that had come down upon them and had been oppressing them and then taking their crops, why he was hiding them when he was threshing them. They had been taking everything they could from Israel. God comes down. He says, I'm about to give you peace. I am Jehovah Shalom. I am the Prince of Peace. I am the King of Peace. I am the Lord of Peace. There is a need in our land today for true peace. We've had people saying it from the 60s. Give peace a chance. They didn't know what peace was. Thought it was a couple of fingers and a pill. It wasn't. True peace comes from God. Genuine peace comes from God. And if you're living in a life right now that is in need of genuine peace, let me invite you to come to know Jehovah Shalom. Gideon met him. When we get done with Wednesday nights with My Heart Christ Home, I'm going to be looking at the names of God, and this is one of the names we'll be looking at. So I'll unpack all of what this is, but let me just cut to the chase on this. Jesus is our peace. Jesus is our peace. And when we look at Philippians 4:7, what we find is that not only through Jesus do we find peace with God, but in Philippians 4:7 it says that the peace of God, which nobody really can understand or fathom, it surpasses all understanding. This morning, it can guard your heart and minds through Jesus Christ. As you come to know the Jehovah Shalom that Gideon met when he was coming into a time of great stress and need and battle. I don't know what battle you're facing, but if you want peace in that battle, you're only going to find it in Jesus. And it is that peace that is being offered to you this morning. Will you pray with me? Father,